Alfred Hitchcock's Murder Mystery Magazine, October 1975. Today's story, Hear No Evil, by Kevin O'Donnell, Jr. The clear April night was softening New Haven's coarseness when Ralph McGuire stepped out of the Timothy Dwight dining hall. After checking the lock, he chained shut a wrought iron gate. The spring air's hint of the sea brought on a smile and relief at being out of the steaming kitchen. He tossed his keys from hand to hand while he walked up Wall Street to Temple. The day had been good. The crew had put out 337 dinners with no strain or tension. The line had moved well. At the end, McGuire and his cook had grinned at each other over the 2 ounces of roast beef left in the steamer pan. Any manager would have been pleased, but McGuire had a special reason for feeling good. He hadn't had to eavesdrop any worker more than once. He hadn't had to probe anyone. That meant he finally had the people he wanted. They hadn't always been there. It had taken him nearly 8 months to find them. If his luck held, he could soon dispense with the eavesdropping completely. When the Yale University dining hall system had hired him, the burly, mustachioed associate director had made a point of telling him, "You should know why there's an opening, Ralph. Maybe that'll keep you from causing another. Timothy Dwight's food cost is too high, 83 cents per meal. The other dining halls do nicely on 71 cents. He had shaken his head and leaned back in his swivel chair. "We don't think TD students eat more than other Yaleys. We don't think the managers we send there are less competent than other managers. We suspect theft. With TD on the very edge of campus, it's easy for a cook or pot washer to hand a package out the back door to a friend. But it's the manager's job to stop theft. If he can't, well, we just can't afford to keep him on." In a rush of irritation, the associate director banged his desk. "This $2,400 a month is too damn much. It's got to stop. I don't care how you do it. That's up to you. But the choice ought to be pretty clear. Stop the stealing or lose your job." The manager's manual suggested that constant package inspection could stop theft, but McGuire realized its drawbacks. People, especially innocent ones, have an aversion to being searched. They become resentful and work sloppily. He shuddered as he thought of what resentment could do to his dining hall. An angry worker doesn't care. Careless serving can cause waste. Careless cooking can cause tragedy. He thrust the manual's suggestion out of his mind. Closing the heavy book, he told the associate director, "I don't like frisking them. There's another way, and I'll bet I'll find it. Let me look around. Let me examine the floor plans and all. I'm good at detecting suspicious behavior. A few well-publicized firings, and we'll see." "If you think so." "I do." "Okay, then. But remember, they're cagey. They're good at disguising suspicious behavior. They should be. I've had enough practice." They may have had practice, McGuire had thought as he left the office. But they can't hide from a telepath. No way. He had strode on for a moment in reflection. High time this came in handy. 12 years I've had it, and it's done no good at all. Damn car accident. It was a dark December night on a twisty Connecticut road. He and 3 other 16-year-olds had been driving and drinking. They were hurrying home before their parents became suspicious. McGuire was at the wheel, slamming the rattling VW through sharp corners, goosing it down shadow-dappled straightaways. Then he tried what he imagined to be a racing turn. Full speed into a curve, jerked the wheel, stamped the brake, twist some more, and let it skid and floor it. It would have worked if a station wagon hadn't been coming in the opposite direction, also speeding. McGuire sobered instantly as high beams blinded him. The boy next to him fainted. He heard the other driver bellow. The right headlights of the 2 cars kissed and exploded in a fury of powdered glass. He remembered nothing more. He awoke in a bed. Crisp sheets pressed his aching body down. Pain throbbed through his ribs. His right arm was far too heavy. He tried to open his eyes and failed. His left hand stiffly patted the bandages wrapped around his head. Before the question in his mind could find form, it was answered by a memory of swerving lights and tires screaming in terror. Then he heard the voices around him. None was happy, pain-colored and distorted. Every one. For a few minutes he fought to separate them, but the effort was too great. Relaxing his tensed muscles, he slumped back. A voice nearby said, "He is awake." It repeated more loudly, "See, I told you, he is awake. Nurse!" "I'm in a hospital," was all McGuire had time to think before a maternal presence enveloped him. He could hear rubber-soled shoes come closer. A different voice, one with love and pity, said softly, "The poor boy." "It's rather unprofessional," thought McGuire. "So you're awake, are you, son? That's good. My name is Mrs. Flanagan. I'm the day nurse. You'll have questions, I'm sure, but remember, I'm not a doctor." She mumbled, "Water." And more clearly, "Would you like a glass of water?" Not trusting his voice, McGuire nodded. It hurt his head. A second later, a thin plastic tube slipped between his lips. Cool water trickled into his mouth. The sensation so delighted him that he failed to hear the doctor approach. "Hell, cover the kid's eyes," grumbled the new arrival. "Good morning, Mrs. F." As McGuire's jaw dropped in surprise, he felt a tugging at his bandages. Then came the soft metal chuckle of scissors on gauze. In an instant, he was staring at a stout, badly shaven doctor. "That feel better?" "Damn, no good," he heard the doctor say. He blinked twice, glancing at Mrs. Flanagan with wide eyes. He stuttered, "Pardon me?" Before parting his lips, the doctor distinctly said, "Crash damage ears? Stupid to tie him up." Then his mouth moved as he said loudly, "Oh yes, is that better?" McGuire's eyes darted to the nurse, who, though smiling, was saying, "I hope that won't leave an ugly scar." Between two rapid heartbeats, fear sprouted in McGuire's brain just as it began to choke him. Mrs. Flanagan, lips motionless, contentedly continued, "Oh God, I'm well trained and he can't read minds. If—" He didn't understand another word. The nurse's statement had sized through his fear, leaving his sense of awe. "Read minds," he thought. "I can read minds." During his 2 weeks in the hospital, McGuire kept himself busy by studying his power. The long ward, with its regularly spaced patients, became his laboratory. By following Mrs. Flanagan's mind and listening to her conversations, he learned to separate the jumble of noises into individual voices, and to link them with the faces he saw. Within a day after discovering his ability, he devised a workable analogy for it. It was simply a mental ear. His physical ears heard physically manufactured sound. His mental ears heard mentally manufactured ones. Also analogously, his telepathy weakened as distance increased. He could detect no thought more than 625 feet away. Between 625 feet and 25 feet, he could discern thoughts by straining, much as one can hear a faint sound by listening carefully for it. As the distance between himself and the thinker lessened further, he was forced to strain not to hear. When it dropped below 5 feet, his concentrating on something else could no longer help him ignore the clamor, even if he chose not to interpret it. Bored with reading, watching television, and amusing his awkward visitors, McGuire practiced. Before he was discharged, he developed 3 kinds of telepathic reception: thoughts, emotions, and sense impressions. Thoughts were easy. Most people keep running mental monologues that can easily be eavesdropped. Emotions were harder because they rarely occur singly. One gives rise to another and reinforces a third, which in turn emphasizes a fourth. McGuire had found sense impressions the most difficult, because few people are aware of what their bodies are noticing, unless it is extreme pain or extreme pleasure. This disappointed him, until he learned how to tap others' nerve lines, ahead of the filters that every sane mind contains. Then the torrent of physicalness was frightening. In time, he discovered how to build his own filters, which scaled intercepted raw impressions down to a level that was tolerable, but still high enough to be interesting. McGuire never told anyone about his new-grown ear. Though young, he was mature enough to suspect a future that would have awaited him. He forced himself to remain silent, even at times when it seemed that his secret must erupt from his mouth. "Yes, sir," he had thought, stepping into TD after his talk with the associate director. The damn thing is finally going to pay for the trouble it's caused me. He had been grimly satisfied as he scanned the high-ceilinged dining hall. Nope, he decided, can't take much out this way. Too many witnesses. Passing into the service area, he saw the 20-foot by 20-foot room had no access to the outside. Safe. The red-tiled kitchen was next. He walked through its towering racks of pots and pans and pushed open one of the windows at the far end. Can't get it open wide enough to hand anything out, he judged. That leaves the back door. He wandered around the kitchen for a while longer, pausing by the huge steam kettle to see whether the landing on the back stairs was visible. It wasn't. From the long cast-iron stove, he found the stairs themselves were hidden. Nobody in there could see anybody going out the back, unless he stood by the door to the stairs. He went up to his office. Once slouched behind his battered desk, he couldn't even see the opposite side of the street. That damn back door is almost invisible. That's the weak spot. External thieves didn't bother McGuire. The back door was spring-locked. The street was so busy that few lockpickers dared to practice their art. But internal thieves. Who questions a man in a white uniform when he calmly loads a van? When the dining hall opened in September, McGuire had taken a seemingly insignificant step. On the employee bulletin board in the kitchen, he had posted a brief message. Please remember that under Section 12, Paragraph D of the union contract, I have the right to inspect any package carried out of the building by any person leaving the building. Employees discovered to be carrying dining hall property through the door in the direction of Wall Street will be fired on the spot. Then he threw a telepathic net over the staircase. He came to work early every day. As he unlocked the door, he imposed his net. With practice, he found he could maintain it unconsciously. It was less strenuous than the physical effort of listening for a particular sound. After the first week of operation, he could be anywhere in the building and still notice a guilty conscience thinking of slipping out. The effort had paid off. Thefts had stopped. Unfortunately, he had been forced to fire 8 of his dining hall's 23 full-time workers, including the storeroom man and all 3 cooks. Rebuilding a staff took time. Only after 8 months was he beginning to feel that TD was running properly. His sigh was carried away by the cool April breeze. Feet scraping on the asphalt, he located his car and warily climbed in. He twisted a key, and the engine purred awake. He flicked a knob, and his headlights chewed into the darkness, pinpointing a book-laden couple reluctant to continue on their way to the library. A wry grin on his face, McGuire eased the car into reverse. As the car slipped along to Guilford, McGuire cursed his talent. Because of it, the evening stretched ahead of him like the road, barren, cheerless, and companionless. He would go home, mix a drink, turn on the stereo, and drop into his leather chair with a book. Any book. It didn't matter. He didn't want to read. He didn't care about listening to the stereo. But what else can a sensitively misanthropic bachelor do after work? He wanted to talk to someone, but he couldn't. Maybe he'd write for a pen pal after all. If you have a friend, you spend time with him. You talk to him. You listen to him. If you don't, you soon lose him. If you do, and you are plagued by an ear that hears the voice in the back of his head, you soon come to hate him. Even the best friends can't resist a nasty thought now and then. A good friend wouldn't say those things to you, but you hear them all. If you're telepathic, you don't have any friends. Or lovers either, muttered McGuire an hour later as he rested on the edge of his clean, cold, lonely double bed. He had analyzed his desire for sex and found it composed of other desires. Many could be placated through other means. One he could satisfy by himself. He plumped his pillow, lay down, and turned off the bedstand light, and let his mind roam the neighborhood. The Thomases were always good. Try them. No, they were asleep already. The Lazewskis were out. The mournful babysitter was alone and could give him nothing. The tentacles of McGuire's desire reached and curled about the bedrooms of the neighbors. As his mind flitted through the Chachka home, a whisper of excitement caught his questioning ear. He paused in the dimly lit room, searching for an accessible mind, At last he found it, comfortingly male. The signs of heart and sweat and gut were right, but... Hell, he heard. She's dead. Before another shaft of emotion could pierce him, he withdrew. He was more embarrassed than normally. Sex, that was one thing. It no longer seemed filthy or perverted to eavesdrop on sex, but death, that was private. Death was to be respected. Mourners were to be comforted, not probed. Flushing slightly, his appetite unsatisfied but deadened, Maguire rolled onto his stomach and pushed himself down the dark hill into sleep. He awoke early the next morning to be at the dining hall before the first worker arrived. He resented settling down at his desk just as the sunlight began to pace New Haven's silent streets, but the obligation to stop the thefts had forced him into 14-hour days. It had, of course, been effective. His first storeroom man alone had been stealing $50 of goods a day, all safely packed into the trunk of his car before 7:30 a.m. As Maguire's car barreled along the deserted concrete, he wondered when he'd finally be able to trust his crew. One problem with arriving at the office at 6 a.m. is that one doesn't see the morning paper. As a consequence, Maguire was not ready for Lieutenant Anatoly of the Guilford Homicide Squad. When the thin, balding policeman entered his office at 9:15, Maguire thought he was a salesman. "Hey," he said, "before you waste your time giving me the pitch, let me warn you that I can't order a single product until the staff dietitians clear it. Their office is over on Elm Street if you want to go right to the top." The other's smile was fleeting. "That's not quite what I want, Mr. Maguire. I came here to talk to you." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and extracted a leather folder. "Anatoly, Homicide Squad." The folder opened and a badge sparkled briefly. "I'd like to talk to you about your neighbor, Mrs. Chachka." Maguire, who had risen to his feet at the other's first words, frowned involuntarily. Remembering himself, he waved the lieutenant into a wooden chair some 7 feet away. It was a distance at which he felt comfortable. He could probe or ignore at will. "I don't understand, Lieutenant. Why?" The policeman looked both puzzled and displeased. Then sympathetic and comprehension gleamed in his bloodshot eyes. "What time did you get here today?" "About 6, but..." "Then you didn't see the papers," Anatoly interrupted. "Sorry to be so blunt, but Mrs. Chachka was murdered last night." "Anne Chachka?" Maguire dropped into his desk chair. "Professor Chachka's wife?" "Yes. But why? Who did it?" "Believe me, Mr. Maguire, if I knew that, I wouldn't be bothering you so early in the morning." He yawned. "You live near them. I thought maybe you could help us." Sure, any way I can." "Good. First, what time did you get home last night?" Geez, I didn't notice. Let's see. I left here about 10 after 8, and it's a 40-minute drive, so 10 of 9, I guess." Lieutenant made a note in the small book that had appeared in his left hand. He looked up. "At what time did you go to sleep?" Sudden realization slapped Maguire. He thought, that must have been him, her, them, He tried to keep his cheeks impassive. "I'm not sure," he said awkwardly. I had a drink. Wait a minute. I listened to about an hour's worth of tapes, so I suppose I crawled into bed about 10 o'clock, give or take 10 minutes. I never look at the clock. My clock radio's been set for 5 a.m. since September. I just slap the button down and turn off the lights. I never look at it." Another note. "The doctor estimated time of death to be between 9:30 and 10:30. Did you hear any strange noises during that time?" "You mean gunshots or something?" "Yes." "Gee, not that I can recall. Since I'm not near anybody, I keep my stereo turned up loud. If it happened before I shut the set off, I never would have heard the thing. Hell, when it's on, sometimes I don't hear my own telephone." "And afterwards?" "No, not a thing that I can remember. No, nothing." "Did you see any strange cars in the neighborhood?" Maguire tilted his chair back, screwed his eyes shut, and raised his face to the ceiling. He tried to visualize the darkened street. "No," he said at last, regretfully. "I don't remember any." Did you know Mrs. Chachka well?" Not really, no. We were neighbors, of course. I'd see her on the street every once in a while and wave, but I don't have much social life. Well, with working 14-hour days, I usually just want to crawl into bed when I get home. I never went to any of their parties or barbecues. Aha. Did you ever see her here? Oh, sure, once in a while. Her husband is a fellow of TD. That means he's affiliated with it. That's a program to foster closer relationships between students and faculty. You know, get them eating together, maybe they'll talk to each other. Professor Chachka takes lots of lunches here. Every once in a while she'd join him. And they'd come in for dinner once a month or so, for the fellows' meeting. Any gossip about her? McGuire squirmed. Well, you know, just the usual, and I'd hate to say anything that would... But you should. It might give us a lead. Well, to get the full story, you ought to talk to Flora. She's the head waitress, and full of gossip. She knows, or claims to know, everything about everybody in any way connected with TD. I'll get to her, but why don't you tell me what you've heard? Well, he moved his chair to look out the window. I've heard that she was a little bored with Professor Chachka. He's something in the engineering department, and I guess that I heard she was not quite content with that sort of thing. You know, earnest, mechanical-minded men and all that. Supposedly, every time she came here, she'd spend a lot of time talking to students, to big, athletic, good-looking students. Flora didn't approve. He grimaced. Anatoly raised his eyes. Anybody in particular? Not that I know of. I don't like gossip, so when Flora starts up, I usually try to quiet her. He couldn't tell Anatoly how Flora nauseated him. She would sidle up close and whisper. Her mind would twist and turn every savory scandal and find its worst possible facet. He couldn't tell him how uneasy he felt around her, or how many times he'd suggested that another dining hall might be more suitable for her talents in small TD. You really ought to talk with her. I will. Anatoly stood up. Look, Mr. McGuire, I don't want to take up too much of your time. If I find something which I think you might know about, or a question you might have an answer to, I'll come back. But right now, it's all theory. Mind if I wander around here asking questions of Flora and all the others? Not at all. McGuire also rose. In fact, if you want to talk to anyone in private, feel free to use this office. Want me to introduce you? No, but thanks. None of the others live in Guildford, so the interviews will be short. I'll just ask a couple questions and be on my way. Well, okay. If there's anything else I can do to help. Sure, Mr. McGuire. After a last note in the little book, he made it disappear. Then he held out his hand. Nice talking to you. Thanks a lot. Their hands touched. McGuire heard Anatoly's mind emotionlessly declare the meeting unproductive, and McGuire clear. As the dry and dusty brain vanished down the steps, McGuire felt his body relax. He couldn't quite understand it. The man had almost no emotions, none of the slimy acid flickers that most people have. He shouldn't have bothered McGuire, yet something about the way his mind pressed against his had left McGuire's nerves on edge. It had felt like leaning against a sun-washed wooden wall on a motionless day. It had been too quiet. No tension had been visible, and some should have been. Dangerous, thought McGuire. Glad he's not after me. After finishing the inventory, he decided to make sure that all was ready for lunch. The kitchen was like a shower room. His shirt collar wilted as steam stroked it. Looking through the pot rack, he could see sweat splashing down the first cook's bent neck. As he strolled over, his foot slipped on the damp floor. Have to talk to Heatherton about that, he reminded himself. He turned his attention back to the cook, whose flashing fingers were seasoning a pan of chicken. Hey, JJ, how's it going? McGuire liked him, because his chuckling mind was one of the few he could reach. He enjoyed bantering with him whenever the chance arose. The fingers froze. The cook looked up. Hey, Ralph. His round black face opened into an engaging grin. Not bad, not bad. At the risk of sounding slightly immodest, I venture to suggest that this here pan of chicken is going to be some of the tastiest baked chicken you have ever been privileged to set tooth to. If you make me a solemn promise that you are going to partake in this culinary masterpiece and not have a greasy hamburger for the 48th day in a row, why, I will in return promise you that yours truly will set aside the most delectable piece for you. Promise?" "Sure enough, JJ," McGuire laughed. "I'm getting tired of hamburgers anyway." "Then this is going to taste all the better, Ralph." "Thanks. You're all set for lunch?" "Yep. Of course, no one's going to mistake poor old TD for Maxime's of Paris, but what can you possibly expect when a master chef is provided with 100% incompetent apprentices?" He threw a mock scowl at the second cook, who was opening a package of frozen beans a few feet down the table. Despite JJ's expression, affection glowed warmly in his mind. "Right on, JJ," retorted the second cook. "As soon as you stop talking and start teaching, we're going to find out just how much of a master you really are." "Keep talking, son," JJ smiled in a kindly way, "and I'll let you have it right between the eyes with a piece of bacon chicken. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." The second cook winked at McGuire and carried the beans over to the steam kettle, some 4 feet away. "But tell me, old man, now that I've moved out of range of your aged arm, just how you going to connect?" McGuire laughed again, slapped JJ on the shoulder. "Okay, Chief, I'll get out of your way. See you later. And save that chicken." He headed for the dish room, a small alcove off the serving room. Passing the clock, he saw that he had enough time to speak to Heatherton, the new general service assistant, who washed dishes and mopped floors. Heatherton was lounging against the dish machine, waiting for lunchtime. As McGuire rounded the corner, he guiltily palmed a cigarette and came to sloppy attention. "Hi, Mr. McGuire," he said cheerfully, his hands behind his back. "What's new with you?" "Hi, Al. Busy?" He stopped 8 feet away. An impression of huge worms slammed into his brain. What the? He shut his ear off, but came no closer. "No." An embarrassed look came over his handsome features. You want to talk, Mr. McGuire? Could I dump this butt? I'd hate to burn the palm of my hand trying to hide it from you." His light blue eyes sparkled with the humor of the situation. "Sure, Al, go ahead." He watched the GSA's powerful back as he wet the cigarette and threw it into the garbage bag. "Say, Al, did you play football?" Heatherton straightened in surprise. "Yeah, why?" "Curiosity. You look big enough and you seem to move nicely. How come you didn't go on to college ball?" "Well, you know how it is. I had about all the schooling I could take. Got better things to do." He blushed slightly. "And none of the good places wanted me. The Michigan coach thought I was starting to hear footsteps, so you might say I didn't go to college on a mutual agreement." "Aha. Well, look, Al, I wanted to talk to you about mopping." As they talked, McGuire wondered why the boy's calm face reflected none of his turmoil. Deciding it was none of his business, he kept his distance and finished as soon as possible. As the crew trickled out through the back door, McGuire mentally checked them off. Flora, clean. JJ, clean. But where the hell did he get that liquor? Soon they were all gone but one. "Al's slow getting out of here tonight." He couldn't be. He could be. There have been unlikelier thieves. He rose as the nervous, fretting presence mounted the steps. He could feel the tension heighten as he clattered across the office and down the stairs. Eyes wary and jaw set, Heatherton was trudging up. A small airline bag in his hand made McGuire groan. Just a warning, he thought. The kid's pretty stupid, but he could be a good worker. Just give him a warning. He'll shape up. "Say, Al," he said mildly, "mind if I look in your bag?" "As a matter of fact, Mr. McGuire," replied the boy uncertainly, "I'd rather you didn't." "I'm afraid I'll have to." As he stretched out his arm, Heatherton's hand dipped into the bag. McGuire found himself gazing into the barrel of a .38. "You shouldn't have insisted, Mr. McGuire. I didn't want to have to kill you too, but..." He made a weak gesture with the gun. "Me too." McGuire started to probe, but the answer came in words. "Mrs. Chachka was bad enough, but..." "Mrs. Chachka?" "Yeah," Heatherton shifted unhappily. She'd seen me play in high school, you know, and when she saw me working here, well, she told me her husband was a big fan of mine and invited me out to their house to see the movies, took my best games." Well, Professor Trashka wasn't there. He gulped. And you can probably guess the rest. I went out to her place every night for about a week, and then the professor came back from wherever he'd been. Keep him talking. Maybe he won't shoot. Maybe somebody will come to help. Keep him talking. So? Well, then the professor went out of town again. I saw it in the paper, he had added defensively. So I went out to see her, and there was a car parked in the driveway. I sat in the car for a while, just sort of thinking, you know. While I was sitting there, I saw 2 shadows in the bedroom. The light went out, then I heard a man laugh. So I drove away. Leaning against the black iron banister, Heatherton sighed. The gun dangled, forgotten, from his left hand. McGuire thought of groping for it, until the boy straightened, and football-trained muscles rippled under his shirt. McGuire longed to probe him, but he knew that 2 sets of thoughts would clutter his mind and hamper his ability to think. The GSA spoke again. I called her yesterday, said I'd come out after work. She didn't like the idea and tried to say she wouldn't be in, but I told her what I'd seen the night before, and she said, "Okay, come on out." Cautiously, McGuire asked, "How did it happen?" "Oh, she was in the living room, called out for me to come in. She was all straight and nervous, told me to sit down and listen. Then she tried to tell me it wouldn't work, that it was over, all the rest. I got mad, she got scared. It's her gun, or her husband's, I don't know. She pulled it out of her purse and said, 'Don't threaten me, leave me alone and get out.'" His lower lip twitching, Heatherton blinked several times. I was mad. I took it away from her and carried her upstairs on my shoulder. When I dumped her on the bed, I must have let go of the gun, because the next thing I knew, she had it in her hand, and I fought her for it, and it went off. Why didn't you call the police and report it? Oh, Miss McGuire, you ought to know better than that. They'd never believe I didn't mean to kill her. They locked me up forever. Oh. He shook his head decisively. That's why I gotta kill you too. I'm sorry, but... Right, spare me the sympathy. Those of Heatherton's thoughts that filtered past McGuire's block were beginning to sicken him. The boy was twisted. He believed his own story, but McGuire didn't. Too many blatant sexual images and remembrances were being thrown into the screen of his mind. He shuddered. The boy's finger tightened on the trigger. "Hey, not here," he gasped in horror. "Why not? The sooner..." Sure, but look, Al," he said rapidly as he could. "Once the police check the bullet, they'll know that the same person murdered both Mrs. Trashka and me. And they'll figure it was someone connected with this dining hall if they find my body here. Cover your traces. Let me lock up here, and you can drive me over to East Rock and shoot me there. Leave my body in the woods or something. They'll never catch you that way." "That makes sense," admitted Heatherton. "But why are you trying to help me get away with it? That's what don't make sense." He searched for a satisfactory excuse. "Well, you see, he tried to force a nervous laugh, and found nervousness came easily. I need more time, Al. Time to get myself ready, you know? And I like to see the stars and smell fresh air one last time. I want to die with clean taste in my mouth. And I don't want JJ or anybody else to wind up in the back room of the station, forced to confess to a crime he didn't commit. Do you?" "No, I guess not, Mr. McGuire." "All right, we'll do it your way. But I'm going to have to tie you up before I let you outside. Tie you and gag you." "Okay." Sweat pasted his clothes to his shaking body. "Thanks, Al." "Yeah, now hurry up here." He gave a command with the gun. "Okay, I just have to take the temperatures of the refrigerators and lock them, and turn off the lights, and then I'll be ready." Heatherton squeezed into the corner of the landing and waved McGuire down the stairs. "Go real slow now, okay?" "Sure, Al. Sure." He took each step with care. "Why do you read the temperatures?" Heatherton asked idly. "I have to. If the temperature's not right, the meat or the milk or whatever will spoil. I check it twice a day, at night and in the morning." "Can't you skip it?" McGuire, paralyzed for a moment, breathed in relief as an answer came. "Of course not. I always do it. If I don't do it on the night I die," he amended. Then the police will start to wonder. He crossed the red tiles to the fenced-in alcove and slid the wire door back on its runners. "I'll do the freezer first," he said, opening the black insulated top of the 3-foot-high box. "The thermometer's down there. I have to stick my head in." "Stop babbling," he warned himself, "or you'll give it away." "Fine. Just remember, I'm right behind you." "Uh-huh. How could I forget?" Fear grabbed him. Was Heatherton in the right position? Was it in there? The fear felt good, and as he rummaged through the frost-covered packages, he let it build for 1 second before he opened the valve wide and let the high-pressure terror buffet of the unsuspecting teenager, who jerked convulsively as awareness of danger exploded in his mind. He swiveled to face the staircase, the only approach for any conceivable danger except that which was beside him. McGuire hefted the frozen salami and swung it in a vicious arc that terminated abruptly on Heatherton's left temple. The boy went down. The gun clattered against the wire wall of the cage. McGuire leapt for the gun, and a second later stood panting and chest-heaving over the inert ex-football player. Damn. Came in handy again. If it hadn't been for the telepathy, Heatherton could have... But then, if it hadn't been for... He shook his head in disgust and went to call Anatoly. Thanks for reading with me.